Hi, I'm Anne Marie, the Anti-HR HR lady, and welcome to my channel. On this channel, I talk about how employees can better understand and protect themselves against HR and assert their workplace rights. If that's of interest to you, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell and tell a friend. Today, I want to talk to you about a workplace law you may have never heard about. It's called the Equal Pay Act. Let's talk a little bit about the Equal Pay Act and ID 3 ways your employer may be violating your rights under the Equal Pay Act that you may not even recognize. First of all, what's the Equal Pay Act? Well, the Equal Pay Act is a law that was enacted in 1963. It's a federal law aimed at abolishing wage disparity based on gender. As you know, for the longest time, America was a very patriarchal society, and it continues to be that, in addition to being a very racist society. And so, there was a time, it's only been 50 years now since women have been able to even open a bank account without a man's permission. In 1963, as you may know, there was a lot happening around civil rights at that time, thanks to Black Americans and the civil rights movement. The Equal Pay Act was passed that year. The primary objective of the Equal Pay Act is to ensure that employees performing substantially similar work, regardless of gender, receive equal pay for their work. The law is crucial to promoting fairness, equality, and economic justice in the workplace. And while we might want to believe that in the year of our Lord 2024, that employers are no longer paying men more than women just because they're men, the reality is that they do. I'll tell you a little story. I worked in an organization that was primarily female, and the president and CEO of the organization was female. And yet when we did a pay study, which I, had to spend a lot of my influence trying to get the organization to even do an equity, in pay study for the organization, what we found overwhelmingly were that the men, and it was primarily white men, were being paid more than women. Even when you looked at experience, etc., whether they had the same level of experience or not, even at entry level, men, white men, were being offered higher pay. And they were being offered higher pay by women, because women were the ones primarily doing the hiring in this organization. Even at the executive level, we found that I, the only Black executive, was the lowest paid person, even though for my background, my education, my experience, the person who did the study said I clearly should have been making 25 to 30% more than what I was being paid. And we found that all of the other executives that were female, except for the president, because of course she looked out for herself, everyone else who was female was being paid less than the men, even though one of the women was responsible for managing more than half of the employees in the organization and bringing in much of the money that was fueling the organization, right? Because she was responsible for making sure that the work that we got done and got done well, which allowed us to get more work. Despite that, she was making less money than her male counterpart, right? Who was not doing the same level of work as her, but was making way more money than her, right? And what I found in this study was that time and time again, through the door, white men were being offered higher rates of pay, regardless of whether their experience matched what they were asking to be paid, okay? And that women were being paid less. Some cases it was because women were asking for less money because they did not know what to ask for or did not have the understanding of what they should ask for, but they were either asking for less money or being offered less money through the door. But the reality was that even in that year, right, which is way past 1963, the women in the organization overwhelmingly were being paid less than the men, and women of color were being paid the least. I was not the only one. I was just an example. Women of color, also more experienced and similarly situated, were being paid less than everyone else. Okay, so this reality continues to be one in 2024, despite the existence of the Equal Pay Act. The Equal Pay Act applies to all employers covered by the Fair Labor Standards Act. And you will recall that I talked about the Fair Labor Standards Act last video, and I'll put a link in the video up here for you to look at that video so that you understand the Fair Labor Standards Act, which is also related to ensuring that employees are paid fairly. The Equal Pay Act applies to all employers who are covered by the Fair Labor Standards Act. You can read my blog about the FLSA because it lays out who those employers are. You can also read the blog on my website now about the Equal Pay Act, which gives even more detail than what is in this video about everything you need to know and understand about the Equal Pay Act, also known as the EPA. Not to be confused with the federal agency, the EPA. As I said, the EPA protects employees from wage discrimination based on gender, right? Now let's talk a little bit about ways in which the EPA is violated by employers every day. First way is by continuing gender-based discrimination. And as I explained in the story I told to you, just several years ago, in my experience, this was still occurring, right? I experienced it myself and had to confront it myself in my workplace. And I used that study as the basis to demand pay equity, not just for myself, but for all of the women in the executive team that were not being paid fairly. But you will find that in a lot of cases, employers don't want to do pay equity studies. They should be good employers should be doing pay equity studies at least every 2 to 3 years, just to make sure that they're keeping up with the market, etc. But a lot of them, especially in the nonprofit arena, don't want to do them because they don't want to know that they're discrimination based on pay. And in fact, they actually know that they are doing it, and they don't want actually evidence to be present showing the pay disparities. But the number one way that employers continue to violate the Equal Pay Act is to continue to engage in gender-based discrimination. And you have to look out for that in your workplace, right? So some employers will still pay male employees more than female counterparts for performing the same job duties. And that's a direct violation of the Equal Pay Act. The second way that employers continue to violate the Equal Pay Act is salary history inquiries. And this is something very common. You will see it in job postings, you will see it on applications, etc., where employers will ask employees or prospective employees, job applicants, to provide salary history. That's a problem because this practice can perpetuate wage disparities, as previous salary levels may have been influenced by gender-based discrimination. So basing current salary offers on past earnings can perpetuate wage disparities, which violate the Equal Pay Act. So anytime you see an employer asking for salary history, they're in fact possibly violating the Equal Pay Act by doing so. And in fact, they don't need that information. As a person who worked in HR, what they should be offering is what is budgeted for the particular position based on knowledge, skills, ability, experience, etc. It should not be based on what you used to make, right? So if you have budgeted $100,000 for a job and a person demonstrates through their knowledge, skills, ability, and experience and training that they should get that job, it shouldn't matter whether they were making $50,000 at the last job. Because in fact, the $50,000 may be because their employer was engaging in discrimination against them because they were female. And so they basically gave them less money just because they were female, even though they deserve to make more. And of course, as I always say, when white people catch a cold, black people catch pneumonia. So if this is happening to white women in the workplace, only imagine what is happening to black women in the workplace, who are always at the bottom of everything. What often happens is white males get paid the most, followed usually by males of Asian descent, then other males of color, so black men, right? And then white women. And then black women are at the very bottom. Or in some cases, it's white men first, then white women, then other persons of color, and then black women, right? So if this is happening in a workplace, it's very, very likely that if you are a black woman, you are suffering the worst because you will be at the very bottom, and the assumption will be that you should be paid the least, despite the fact that more likely than not, we are the most qualified. We don't even get an interview if we are not the most qualified, but yet we are often and almost always, not just often, almost always paid the least. And this is clearly a violation of the Equal Pay Act. So a third way that employers may be violating the EPA is failure to address gender-based pay disparities. So employers may neglect to conduct regular pay equity audits or address gender-based pay disparities within their organizations. This lack of oversight allows wage discrimination to persist and violates the EPA's mandate for equal pay for equal work. Okay? So if you work in an organization that does not do pay equity audits, as I just mentioned, or address gender pay disparities in any way, they are likely in violation of the EPA. So one of the things that I would recommend that people do, especially those of you who are working in corporate work environments, when you go in interviews, you need to ask questions. People are always afraid to ask questions because they're afraid they won't get the job. But the thing is, why do you want to work for an employer who's going to be, discriminating against you through the door? So you need to ask questions about whether they conduct pay equity audits, and when was the last one they did when was the last time they did one, because it will show you what their commitment to equity is in their workplace, right? And if they can't show that they've been doing them on a regular basis, I think that should be a red flag for you. And if they have any kind of attitude or act, any kind of way when you ask, that should be a red flag for you, because properly managed organizations should be doing pay equity audits on a regular basis. Best practice, I think, is at least every 1 to 3 years, ideally every other year, because the way that salaries change, if you really want to be in front of what is fair and right in terms of what you pay your people, you should be doing these on a regular basis. And you can do them yourself as an organization with your own data, and the availability of data outside of the organization is very, very easy to get. You can also hire a consultant to do it. So this is not something that organizations can't do if they don't want to do them. I have overseen pay equity audits at multiple organizations. So I know that they are not difficult to do if an organization actually wants to do it, right? And most organizations at a minimum collect information about their pay scales, etc. And so it should not be difficult to do. The other thing is ask to see the salary range table, right? A lot of organizations share that information. And if they don't, again, red flag. Why don't they want you to know what the salary pay ranges are inside your organization for your position? A lot of organizations have gotten really savvy, and what they share is very, very limited because they don't want you to know that they're not paying you fairly. Right? But the key is to ask questions, and ask lots of questions. And this is a great segue to what you can do if you think your employer is violating your rights under the EPA. So here are a couple things that you should do to make sure that you're in front of any violations of your employer of the Equal Pay Act. The number one thing that you should be doing is documenting. And I'm sure you guys are tired of hearing me say that you need to document, but I cannot overemphasize how important it is to be documenting your workplace. And if you suspect that your employer is engaging in violations of the EPA and unfair wage disparities between men and women in your organization, you've got to keep meticulous records of your job duties, your performance evaluations, and any instances of wage disparity based on gender. Detailed documentation is going to strengthen your case and your argument when you claim that your employer is violating the Equal Pay Act. Grab access to my AntiHR documentation journal. It is available on my website. The journal teaches you not just what to document, but how to document correctly and effectively. Because I find over and over again when I talk to people who come to me, they tell me they have documentation, but what they present to me is not good documentation. Okay, so it's very important to know how to effectively document. So get on my website, grab access to it. It's a downloadable digital documentation journal, and start documenting your workplace. And if you believe that your employer is violating the Equal Pay Act, start documenting the proof that you have of that, the evidence, emails, messages, comments in meetings, any information that you've actually seen that shows the disparity. Keep track of that stuff and document it. The second thing is that if you feel that you have silver bullet evidence of your employer violating the Equal Pay Act, I do not recommend that you confront HR or your manager with this concern unless you get advice first. So, because as I explain all the time, when you go to HR and you present these issues, it often will result in retaliation and targeting of you by your manager with the help of HR. Okay? So I don't recommend that you just, go shaking your proof to HR. Instead, I recommend that you contact me, do a discovery call. Let's talk about what your situation is, what you believe your documentation is, what you think your proof is, and then what steps, strategies, tactics you should go through to confront this issue in a way that will lessen the likelihood of HR and your manager retaliating, targeting, or trying to fire you because of what you have confronted them with. So you can visit my website and book a discovery call, and I'm happy to have a chat with you. The third thing that you should do, if you believe that you have proof that your employer is violating your rights under the Equal Pay Act, is educate yourself about a possible exit. If you wish to use your employer's violation of your rights as grounds for negotiating an exit with cash in hand, enroll in my AntiHR online course, How to Ask for an Exit from Discriminatory Hostile Workplace with Cash and Actually Get It. You can grab access on my website, download it today, and start mapping your strategy to get out of there tomorrow. If an employer is violating your rights under the EPA, they are engaging in illegal behavior, and you can use that as leverage to get them to pay you to exit your workplace through a separation with severance. If you take this course, it will teach you how to do it. You can also book a discovery call with me to discuss it if you would like to work one-on-one with me to do this. The course lays out what I teach my clients one-to-one, so I encourage you to consider grabbing access to the online course. The next thing that I highly recommend that you do is please read the blog post on the website. It provides even more information than I'm providing in this video about everything you need to know about the Equal Pay Act. I have lots of blog posts about multiple workplace acts and laws and information that employees need to have. You guys are not reading it, and then you're coming to me and asking me for information that's already readily available for you, right? So go on the website, read the information, read the blog posts so that you can be a better educated employee and a better advocate for yourself in the workplace. Remember, protecting yourself as an employee in the workplace is your responsibility. What they're doing to you that is wrongful may not be your fault, but protecting yourself is your responsibility. So the more information you have and the more information you take and use and exercise, the better off you will be. So I hope this video has really given you some information that maybe many of you may not have about the Equal Pay Act and the existence of the Equal Pay Act and your rights under the Equal Pay Act. And I hope that you will read the blog post and pay attention to whether or not your employer might be violating your rights under this act. Remember, HR is not your enemy, but they're definitely not your friend. But I am. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.